done for me lately kind of world, which we see there on the left-hand side. And then when it comes to actually taking action, it seems as though sometimes you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So that's kind of the framework that we see kind of on a day in and day out basis as we help with economic developers trying to navigate sometimes tricky world of economic development. And here I put together, this is my, in kind of our experience, what we see as an outline for economic development as a process. And I'm going to add to that it's just a crude outline of economic development as a process. But it starts there at the top with the assessment of the community, kind of understanding where you are today or where you are at a point in time. And it usually involves putting together a strategic plan. So it's by taking a look at that assessment of the community, as everyone looks at the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, but then identifying target industries and so forth through that strategic plan. And then you get on about the business of attraction and business retention and expansion, and you're identifying prospects. And then we get to what we're going to talk about today, which is the deal. And this is where, when I say the deal, I'm really just talking about when you have a prospect and you're in the process of negotiating and trying to find the right site, to put the right deal together, to then convince maybe your board or elected officials that this is a worthy project, it's worthwhile, and it's worth the support of the community. And then we can see it kind of wraps up there, at least in this one cycle, in results. So that business comes in and operates, and it's going to have a number of effects that you can all know. A lot of people talk about jobs and talk about economic output, just those sorts of things, the kind of the improvements that it has, or the benefits that it has for the community. And then in some ways the cycle starts again, and so now you're in this new position, but now what are the ways that we can improve the community? And so what's interesting to me, just as I'll kind of take a little bit of an aside, what's interesting to me is with the if you think about economic development consultants, and there's a number of different consultants. Obviously, Impact Data Source is a consultant to the economic development industry. But what you see is that in this assessment of the community and the strategic plan, these first two kind of stages that I have written out here in my crude outline, these first two stages, there's a number of economic development consultants out there that can help you put together your strategic plan and identify target industries. There's also probably Golden Shovel would count themselves one that helps with the attraction piece, and maybe other aspects of this as well, in the sense of marketing and that kind of digital media, and getting your organization in front of, or your community in front of decision makers and so forth. And so there's a lot of focus in the economic development kind of consulting arena for organizations to rely on outsider support in those first few stages where you're assessing the community, where you're developing that strategic plan, and you're working on attraction and business retention and expansion. What's funny to me is that what I've noticed, when we get to this deal stage, this is when all your friends seem to go away, and that the consultants that you see in the industry are usually in the form of site location consultants or incentive consultants, and so you're kind of there somewhat battling on your own. And sometimes it would be good to have a friend in that stage of the analysis, and that's really, I kind of think, as I think about our business, that's really where Impact Data Source kind of comes in and is able to lend some help in that process. So just as I said before, the deal is really kind of the negotiations, and so there can be roadblocks in this process of kind of putting that deal together. There could be roadblocks in the form of competitive roadblocks, like competing sites or other areas that the business or the firm may be considering. There could be legal roadblocks just in kind of internally within the city. Is this a site that can be zoned the correct way, or can we get certain easements and those sorts of things to kind of make the deal come together so that it's a viable site for the business. And then we have, as I'm kind of labeling them, human roadblocks. And so this is what I'm talking about with appointed or elected officials, or the ever-present concerned citizens. And these are the ones that can take a little bit more careful handling, and it's maybe sometimes it's easy to get frustrated, or to even just kind of start out and dismiss them. But really, it's something that you want to be prepared for. And so you want to know, what are their concerns, and then how can you address those concerns. And so typically what we find when economic developers are kind of at this stage where they're putting the deal together and they're trying to get support from all their local stakeholders for their project or for the package that they're putting together, the questions typically kind of center on two different issues. One is, why this project? Why do we really want this project? And then maybe if you've been able to convince folks there, if you're going to be providing some sort of support from the community, whether it's through tax abatements or grants, or even just sometimes with helping with permitting and different things, why are we doing this? Why this incentive? And so I think the answer to this, of how you can address these concerns, it kind of takes a little bit broader approach than what we'll get into today, but I want to focus in on being able to kind of show the benefits of a deal, and maybe not even, they might not all be benefits, but being able to kind of get a full 360-degree view of a project, and so that you can have clarity for all of your community stakeholders. So what we suggest and what we kind of put together over the years is what we call a deal impact analysis. And so to put together a deal impact analysis, you'll have information about this new project. So it's the type of business, what industry it's in, the capital investments that's expected, and maybe the timeline of that capital investment if it's being phased in, the number of jobs, the salaries, and then the workforce needs, specifically what positions are being created. And the deal impact analysis, as we put it, goes beyond the economic impact. And so you're probably familiar with seeing economic impacts where they talk about the number of spin-off jobs. So for every one direct job, there's another spin-off job in the community, or something like that. Same thing with salaries and economic output. Those are the typical economic impact numbers that you would see. And sometimes they're nice, and that may answer some questions, but it's usually not something that is going to get you very far in kind of explaining or trying to understand the real impact of a project. And so what we propose and what we kind of typically deal in are the deal impact analysis, where economic developers really need to evaluate the deal. And so we say fiscal impact here. This is what we're talking about in terms of additional revenues for, let's say, the city or the county or even the state, depending on who's looking at the project. So the fiscal impact, or what are the additional net revenues that the local government would receive. And this is really where everything we see as it comes together. And so who gets that revenue? And then specifically, so if there's a local sales tax, well, which entity? Is it the city that gets that, or is it a county, or do they each get 1%, something like that? And then if there are incentives being considered, how does that feed back into the analysis? So if you've appropriately broken out property tax, let's say, well, if you're going to offer a tax abatement as a function of this, we need to pull that back out to say that, well, they would be paying this, that's the tax rate, but we're offering, or we're considering, an abatement. And so, as I was just talking about before, you have this level of these concerns, and it usually boils down to why this particular project, and then why this incentive. And so, as we kind of say, the deal impact analysis isn't going to be even necessary in all cases. A lot of times, you won't get down to this stage. This is usually the deal impact analysis is very far along in the stage. And it needs to kind of hit some hurdles ahead of time, and those are usually pretty unique to the community that's being involved. But these prerequisites before we do a deal impact analysis, these are these aren't necessarily my prerequisites, but it's kind of just a best practices prerequisites perhaps. And that's things like, is this really a, so they get to that question of why this project. And so in terms of why this project, it might be, well, because we've identified that this type of business operates in this industry, and that's an industry we want to target. So, is this a business that we want to target? So yeah, if that's checking that box, that would be a good thing. What are some other prerequisites that you might consider before you get to the deal impact analysis? And those would be things like, is this a healthy company? Are they, are you their last ditch effort there to kind of make a go of it for that business, or are they growing and expanding? Is this going to be a worthwhile investment? So some of those are the concerns that you would want to think about before you even get to getting into this evaluation of the deal impact analysis. And so just to kind of tie all of this together, when I'm talking about the deal. And I'm explaining about economic impacts, which are those jobs and salaries, economic output. How does all of this tie together? And so we have on our website, we have a video explanation of it. And so with these slides, you can click on that link. I won't click on the link now, but the idea is that if there's a new business that comes in, they're going to create some jobs, and they're going to create, that's going to create the spin-off activity that we talk about. That I'm not really discounting that. I'm just saying that we need to go beyond that. And so those economic impacts are going to translate into fiscal impacts. So by having new businesses and new employees, there's going to be additional tax revenue coming in. But it's not all going to be on the positive side. There's going to be some additional costs, most likely. So if the city is thinking they're going to get a bunch of new tax revenue from this new building, they need to keep in mind that there's going to be some increased cost in, let's say, public safety, so things like police, fire, EMS. If there's going to be a resulting number of workers moving to the area, perhaps to fill some of these new positions, the school district may see an increase in its cost to educate students. And so we need to keep in mind that those economic impacts are going to drive some fiscal impacts. And then when we get down to it, we want to just evaluate, what's the change in overall social welfare. And so if the revenues are higher than those costs, it's going to put the city or the county or the state, whichever entity we're talking about, it's going to put them in a position where they can provide more services or potentially even lower tax rates. And so those are the types of projects that you'd want to encourage in the city. And so those are ones that are obviously going to have a positive fiscal impact, and that's going to be how we draw that connection through those economic impacts to the fiscal impacts and decide whether or not this is a good deal or not. We have here a little recipe card for an impact analysis, for our deal impact analysis, and it just drives home those points again, that the ingredients here, it's one part economic impact analysis, several parts fiscal analysis, and then a splash of incentive analysis, just to understand how possible incentives might compare or feed back into those bottom line revenues for additional tax revenues. The fiscal impacts, as I've said before, this includes the fiscal impacts include the additional revenues and the costs for public entities. So these are things like taxes, fees, charges, lease revenue, depending on the type of deal that's being put together. A lot, very often some of those apply if it's a land lease or certain things like that. If it's on an airport property, maybe the city owns or some entity owns buildings there. And then, as I've already mentioned, that there most likely will be costs for public safety, education, infrastructure, those sorts of things. And so, in order for the analysis to be useful, you need to have these things itemized by the entity. So if you just see an aggregate number of, okay, great, it's going to be this amount in property taxes, that's not that helpful for the city, because everybody wants to know, how much will the city receive from its portion of the local property tax rate, let's say. Or if there's local sales taxes, a lot of times, for example, in Texas, there's a local city, the cities have a local sales tax, and so it's important to identify that, let's say the school district doesn't receive that sales tax money, it's actually the city. And in other areas of the country, there's local income taxes. Sometimes those follow the workers back to where they live, or they might, just stay there in the place where they work. It's kind of, it can be kind of all over the board. But it's important to be able to isolate that and not just look at things in a big aggregate and not really be able to see who gets what. So I'm going to jump in to our model real quick. This is a screenshot, but I'm going to go into our model and just show you kind of what that looks like. I'm going to pull up Impact Dashboard, which has our online web-based model that allows ED organizations to evaluate projects of their own. And so this just summarizes what we see as kind of probably the most common and most useful information that can be put together on a particular project. So in my example here, if we just start up here in my this little bit of a summary, we're talking about a manufacturing business, a plywood manufacturer. They're going to invest $1.4 million in a new building, and they're going to add $1 million in machinery and equipment, and they're going to have some taxable inventories of $900,000. In this example, we're thinking about a business located in Texas, and so what you'll see here is based on kind of the tax profile or the tax structure of a Texas city, but we work across the country, and so not every community looks exactly like this. For example, not every community taxes inventories, not every community has a local sales tax. But what we see here, as we evaluated this project, we can start with these net benefits of $380,000. This is when we take the total revenue coming in and the total costs going out. This is what we estimate for the city to receive over the next 10 years, and it's important to kind of look at it over a horizon, because, just as you know, abatements and so forth, those things happen or phase out over time, and so you don't want to just take a one-year snapshot of things, especially when projects typically phase up and phase in. If we look at this, the $380,000, that's kind of inclusive of these benefits, which include sales taxes, the different types of property taxes, some utility revenues, some franchise fees, and some other miscellaneous taxes and user fees. That's our benefit subtotal was $535,000. On the cost side, we wanted to account for the cost of city-owned utilities, so a lot of cities will provide water, wastewater, solid waste. That's the cost we're accounting for there. And then on government services, these are where we try to estimate a marginal cost to provide some of those government services to the new business and potentially new workers moving to the area. And so on the net, after we take these benefits and the costs, we get that $380,000. Over a 10-year period, we can see what that looks like graphically. We've got our benefits here above the line here in the dark blue, and our costs below the line in lighter blue. Our net benefit kind of cuts through in this orange bar, and if we were to add up those orange dots every year, that would give us that $380,000. And so just to kind of put this in context, what were some of those economic impacts that drove all of these fiscal impacts? Well, we had 50 direct jobs. We calculated some spin-off jobs of about 19 spin-off jobs for a total of 69 new jobs to be created as a result of this plywood manufacturer. The salaries initially were $35,000 to the direct workers. Spin-off workers made a little bit less, but on average across all of the workers, the average salary of these new workers was about $31,000. The capital investment totaled about $3.8 million. That's just the buildings and the FF&E. And then we have something that we call residential development, and this is that part where we talk about workers potentially moving to the area. And so out of the 69 new jobs that are being created, what percentage of those jobs will be filled by people that move to the area? So that's an important thing to think about. In some cases, as you're probably already thinking, in some cases, if the business is hiring folks and you expect, looking at your current labor market and understanding your community, you say, well, no, that's why we're trying to attract that business. We have all those types of employees that they want to hire, and that's why this is a good fit. Perhaps there would be no residential change at all, and so that there would be no one relocating. So this is 5.2 relocations. That means 5.2 people we assume will be moving to the area. In some cases, you may already know that they're relocating from another part. The business itself is relocating from another part of the country, and they tell you that we're going to have about 30% of our workers relocate, and they're going to probably live in your city. And so that would be something that you can use to kind of modify these inputs as you go. Now, this, as I said, is something that is very specific to the project that you're working on. Those people that relocate to the area, they're going to have an impact through the fact that they might generate or might produce some additional taxes and revenues. They might also impose some additional costs, like we talk about as the community grows. There's going to be an increase in those public safety costs, let's say. Thinking about all of this from the city's perspective at this point, but we know in different communities or different states across the country, maybe the county is the one where most of this stuff happens. So you would want to look maybe most closely at the county's net benefits. Over here, we have just a quick summary of those net benefits for over the 10-year period for all of the entities that we included in our model. So here we see the city, we see the county, and we see the school district. In our model, we have a one-page report that really just summarizes everything from kind of that most important entity's point of view. But this detailed report will provide a little bit more of a narrative and explain things from the perspective of all of the taxing entities. So now we get to see what happens for the county, for the school district, and for these other maybe ancillary taxing districts. And we'll also be able to see kind of in detail what are the sources of benefits and sources of costs for the county, for the school district, and so on. The model is helpful, or a report like this is helpful in communicating the project, because you get to see not only the economic impacts, those things like jobs and salaries, but you also get to see the sources of revenues, the things that some of those elected officials might be most interested in. So perhaps the mayor is going to want to know, what's this mean in terms of property taxes for the city and the city's general fund? And so that's going to be able to answer some of those questions. And the other piece that we talked about was not only the economic impact, not just the fiscal impact, but then the possible incentives that might be considered. And so in our tool, we have this tab called Public Support, and this is where we can take a look at possible property tax abatements, or maybe just other kind of what we call non-tax incentives, and you can think of these as just generic incentives that you may be offering. So let me first start with tax abatements, and I'll give some more examples of those non-tax incentives. So for tax abatements, let's say that the city was considering offering an 100% tax abatement on the value of that building for the first 5 years. So if we turn that on, now we can see kind of graphically, we're get an analysis of what's going on. This graph is showing us in the dark blue boxes above the line, it shows us the total city property tax liability. So the business is going to be on the hook for some of these taxes. This is the full liability, $343,000. Now, if we implement that abatement for 100% over the first 5 years for that building, we can see that that would mean the business would get to avoid paying or have these taxes abated in the value of about $57,000 over that 5-year period. So the net collected then drops down to $285,000. And so just to kind of show you how all of this comes together, if we go back to that report, now our net benefits have been reduced by that value of the $57,000. So our real property taxes are now that much lower by the $57,000. And so you may offer, if you're considering other options, maybe they want to be more competitive and they'll offer an exemption on all of the inventory taxes that they might have, and maybe they'll throw in a little bit on the business personal property or the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And we can see how that affects it. And just as soon as we click on those things, we can see that calculate there on the right-hand side. I'm going to take off the abatements, but you can certainly there are deals where you might stack these types of incentives on top of each other, where you would have an abatement and then maybe some sort of consideration for maybe infrastructure improvements. And so that might be an example of one of these non-tax incentives. So for example, let's say that the business this manufacturer was going to start up, and they were going to have to put in a new building, and I actually needed to run the water line out to this new building, and they've been told that it's going to cost $100,000. And so you want to think about, well, if the city provided an incentive in the amount of that $100,000, how can we think about that? And we would suggest you think about that as an investment in the project. And what we can do is calculate from that a rate of return and a payback period. So here, at least graphically, just to kind of wrap your head around what you're looking at here, this blue box shows our incentive value being paid out up front of the $100,000. And we want to compare that incentive against the return on the investment, which is kind of illustrated by this orange line that we see here. This is the net benefits to the city over the 10-year period, and this is going up. This is hitting that $380,000, if you remember from before. And so when we compare the $100,000 versus the $380,000 to be received, that gives us an average annual rate of return of about 38%. And that, in the way that this comes together, is about a 3-year payback period. And so this is one way that you can evaluate an incentive like infrastructure grant. You could do the same thing if you were waiving or you're going to pay for some permits and fees. If you were thinking about just a job creation grant, you could take the same approach. The nice thing about this, and this goes to the communication and kind of building support, is that you can run a number of different scenarios. So a lot of our clients will say, well, we're thinking about an incentive, but we know the board or we know the city council won't consider anything beyond a 5-year payback period. So I don't know what that incentive would be, but I know that our limit is a 5-year payback period. And so if we do this, the model will tell us kind of exactly what that incentive amount would be. So at a 5-year payback period, we can see that our total incentive could be up to $175,000. And that would give us a 22% rate of return. Now you can, again, come at this from really any direction you'd like. You can select the rate of return or even do an incentive per job. So here, let's say that we did $2,000 per job. I think we had 50 direct jobs originally. And so here we see that the $100,000 incentive, again, being paid out over time, now looks like this. And we can see, again, that we have incentives being paid out kind of consistent with when the jobs are being added on. So if we go back to, I didn't look at this page yet, but the scenario info tab is where we can enter all the project details. So this is where we've entered the total number of jobs. It was 50 jobs, but they're being phased in. If we see here that we're adding 25 in the first year, 5 jobs years 2 through 4, and then 10 jobs in year 5. This scenario info page, this is where you can specify everything that's going on with the project. So this is where we can think about those workers relocating to the area, the average salaries that are going to be paid, that capital investment. So here I have some detail on the capital investment for this project. We get into some other things which are relevant in the case of this particular project, like taxable inventories and taxable purchases and taxable sales. So as all of that information comes together and we can look at these incentives, and we can do kind of any number that we're comfortable with as we adjust these things around, and we look at that report, we can see now the one-pager even includes some analysis of that incentive. So this one-page report is really kind of tries to pull it all together in terms of what this project means in terms of economic impacts, fiscal impacts, and how that incentive fits in with all of it. A lot of times what we see is that clients will kind of have things in all different places, and it's never really kind of brought together to be summarized in kind of a consistent way. Let me jump back to the slides. I've got just a couple more things I want to hit on, I guess. So as I mentioned, the slides that we have here just have some screenshots, so you'll be able to see some of those things from the model. We also have the model is available. You can just test out a kind of a demo version of the model, so you can go out to our website. It's just we have the link here. I'll send it along with things. But you can go out and kind of see how the model works for yourself and get to play around with it a little bit. You know, whether you're doing, let's say, using a model like the one impact dashboard like we just looked at, or whether you're having a report run kind of on a one-off basis where you try to pull all of those pieces together, there really are some benefits of either using a model or kind of consistently using a report to summarize these this type of information. And so, for example, the biggest one that we see is it helps you communicate effectively, and it helps you communicate not only with your board and city council, as I've kind of talked about today, but it also helps you communicate effectively with that business that you're working with, or the consultants that are helping that business. So as I mentioned, the site location consultants and incentive consultants, those guys that are you know, on the other side of the table, everybody's friends for the first part of that economic development life cycle there, and then the consultants seem to all be on the other side. But this is using a model like this, you can really help them say, look, this is the way we're evaluating your project, and you know, not that I don't want to give you $1 million, I just can't by looking at these numbers. You know, this is all we can do. This is how we could help you. The other thing is this idea of having a consistent communication format is really extremely valuable. And so your board, your city council, or even state legislature can get comfortable with the same approach. So it's not that you have, every time you have a board meeting or present a project that you're using some sort of new or improved process. Once you get a standard down, you can evaluate all the projects kind of in that same way. And then the other thing that I'll say is that it lets you compare apples and oranges. And what I mean by that is that you can look at projects that are not similar. So let's say that some of your targets included, like I said, a manufacturing business, but then let's say you also had a headquarters was something that your community was looking to attract. But by using this approach where you're boiling things down to net benefits, you can compare those projects on the basis of the net benefits, which is in a consistent format, whether it's as we said, maybe a manufacturing project or a headquarters. And so we're able to compare those apples and oranges in this case. And then the other thing that's really helpful is with scenario analysis. And so as there's always uncertainty in these projects as they come together. If you have different scenarios where maybe the jobs are being all added in year 1, or maybe they're being phased in over time, or maybe they're going to have an expansion in year 5, or maybe they're not. You can work through the different scenarios and see how much does that affect the bottom line, and then it can help you, as I say here, should I get hung up on this assumption? And so sometimes you'll run the 2 different scenarios and say, oh, actually, it doesn't really matter when the jobs get hired, whether they're phased in or whether they're all in year 1. The impact is essentially the same. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. I guess we can open it up to questions at this point if any have come in. Again, this is my contact information. You can call me directly. I've got the email address there. We've got our basic website is just impactdatasource.com, but you can check out the model, check out that demo through theimpactdashboard.com, or you can get to it from our website as well. Also, just kind of highlighting there, I have office hours. This is something that we started doing earlier this year, and it's been helpful for us, and I think it's helpful for other folks too, just to be able to talk through particular maybe economic impact related problems that they might be having, where we can share some of our knowledge, but we can also kind of learn from some of the situations that you're in. So essentially, it's some free advice during my office hours if you want to give us a call. There on Wednesdays, even if you're just trying to kind of plug through something on your own, or you're trying to understand maybe property taxes a little bit better, feel free to give me a call. But with that, I think I'll kind of turn it back to see if there's any questions that have come in the meantime.
Great, thanks, Paul. Excellent presentation, very interesting. Yeah, at this point, anybody who would like to submit any further questions, please feel free to put them in over on the control panel. I do have a couple questions in. And the first one, Paul, is what does an economic development group need to prepare to work with a group like yours?
Well, what they need to prepare, I mean, it's usually we kind of, I guess, meet people where they are. So it would be, in terms of trying to just understand a little bit more about what your problems are. I guess usually, as any consultant is in that position, they're usually helping someone solve a problem, and so the problems in economic development are kind of generally all over the place, I suppose, but we've probably seen some iteration of it in the past. And so if you just kind of come and explain what you're looking to do, if it's just to put a model together or something like that, we might ask, what are some of the unique things there at the local level of kind of what are the types of incentives that you're typically thinking about, or maybe you own a significant amount of land and part of your plan is to sell that land off or maybe develop it or whatever it might be. So some of those details would be helpful just to kind of have that context. But generally speaking, as we put models together for clients, that's the type of information that we can just go out and research a good bit. A lot of it is just kind of understanding the local tax structure. Sometimes it's so hard to find things about tax agreement financing districts if there's some very specific things happening at the local level. Those are things we might ask for some more tips on, but it usually just starts with a conversation to kind of hear what you're looking for exactly, but a lot of this information, if you're thinking about, well, I don't know where to get the property tax rates and all these different things, we handle all that. We know where to get that information and how to get that information, and so it's usually pretty painless, and we usually try to tailor whatever it is to your specific needs at the time.
Great, thank you. Another question came in. What are your rates? And do you charge by the analysis, or do you charge an hourly rate on the work?
We typically charge, so for the models, as we talked about, what we were looking at today with this model is an annual license. So the model's licensed on an annual basis, and there's a fee for that. And then for an individual analysis, we charge just a single fee if you don't want to. So for some of our clients, they don't need the model, or they don't want to have their hands on the model, or maybe their board says no, you need to get a third party to do it completely. In those cases, we just charge per project, and it'll be somewhere between, if it's just a new business, so for in this example, we had a new business, a new manufacturer coming in, it'll be somewhere in the range of $750 to $1,000. It might be, depending on what's going on, if it's more complicated. So, for example, mixed-use projects where maybe there's going to be some residential and some retail and a hotel and those sorts of things. Those projects can get a little bit more expensive, or a fair amount more expensive. But we would charge just kind of on a per fee basis, kind of based on our experience of how long those take to pull together.
Excellent. I hear another question come in. How much is an annual license on the model?
Yeah, the licensing on the model, it varies a little bit, and I'll just kind of back up a moment to show. So in this case, if you're just a single community, and say you have just one city that you're covering, and you're within one county, the model pricing starts at $6,000 per year, and so there's no initial upfront fee or anything like that. It's a $6,000 annual fee for the model. The reason we say it starts at $6,000 is some folks are kind of a regional organization, and so you might need to build in 3 counties and all of the 45 cities underneath that area or something like that, and that's really where we spend our time in putting this model together, is going out and researching those individual tax rates. And so by building in 3 different counties and all of the other ancillary cities and school districts that might be incorporated into that region, it's going to take a little bit more time. So it would be more than the 6,000 in those cases. But again, with the annual license, what we do is we put it together and we do the training. We do training over GoToMeeting typically, and then we're available for follow-up training if you have turnover during the year. But even if you've run an analysis and it's like you're scratching your head and saying this can't be right, we're available to take a look at it with you and say, okay, well, looks like this is what's going on. Did we put in the right, maybe the client gave you bad information, or the prospect gave you bad information for one of the inputs. Why don't you go check up on that? Or you could just be at the process of, okay, it's this type of project, I don't know, how exactly should I put that in? Something like that. And that's something that we can help with kind of throughout that annual license period. We're pretty much available whenever you need us, so you don't have to wait between 2 and 4 on Wednesdays to call me. You can call me pretty much anytime or send me an email.
Great, thanks. One more, do you have a case study or a story you could share where the impact analysis helped get over a hurdle or influence the decision with either the consultants or boards?
Well, yeah, there's one. So we last year, I think the typical one, the one that maybe, and I can probably think of a bunch of those if I take my time, but the ones where, okay, well, we did this analysis and it said we should do this incentive, and it was a great. We had the ribbon cutting and the breaking the ground ceremony and all that. But there's actually one that I wrote about on our blog last year. We had been talking about kind of the many different ways that our clients use impact analyses. And so it's not just for this communication and this board piece, but very often is. But one of those highlighted kind of the communication with, as we were talking about, kind of the communication with the incentive consultant and the let me get back to that. So with the incentive consultant and the business, I guess it was really the business that was trying to, really get more than the city was willing to offer. So this was a city in Texas, and they licensed our model, and they were running the analysis, and there was a real big misunderstanding between kind of what the business thought they were going to be doing for the city and what the facts were and what the benefit of the city was. I believe it was some sort of manufacturing and then warehousing aspect, and somewhere down the line the product would be sold and would be subject to sales taxes. And in the state of Texas, there's a 6.25% sales tax, and then there's a local 2% typically. And so the business was certain that they were going to have this huge impact. And it was just the fact that ultimately, I mean, there was going to be a nice impact, but the business was certain that they should be getting, that the local city there should be rebating, their millions and millions of dollars on these sales taxes that would be paid. And it was an interesting thing because our client kind of brought us into it and tried to say, well, look, are they right? Like, do they understand what they're talking about, or are we right? And we had to give them the kind of the backup to say, no, you're not going to get those taxes. I mean, if you gave a rebate or gave some incentive, kind of respective of those state level taxes, that's essentially going to be money out of your pocket because you're not actually getting those state taxes, number one, and actually they won't be being paid locally. So even the 2% local wasn't going to be your money either. And so that was a case where I don't know ultimately what the business decided, because so many times the businesses are, they might just end up locating in that community anyway. But I know they had a hard time understanding that their impact wasn't quite what they thought it was going to be at that local level. As they were trying to hit up the city, they thought their impact was much larger, and the model was able to show, let's put the brakes on this whole thing. And I, as much as they protested a little bit, we had the model that showed them exactly what their impact would be, and it was just a good example of making sure you're running the numbers on your side and understanding what your city will get relative to maybe the county, the school district, or the state.
Thank you. Excellent. It's a great example. All right. We do not have any other further questions. Certainly, if anybody attending today has further questions for Paul, they can reach him via his email. And I want to just say thank you, Paul, for presenting today. It's a really interesting product you guys have developed, and thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, and I'll see you guys next week or next month at our next webinar. Just keep your eyes posted. We'll be sending out information through our usual channels or through our website. So thanks again for attending, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.